Lawyers of Reddit, what was your oh shit moment in court? Never ask a question to which you don't know the answer. Prosecutor suggested to me client that the canned goods he had burgled were to be used to trade for drugs. Me thinking the idea ludicrous, asked my client whether he has ever traded food for drugs. To which he replied that he once exchanged a frozen chicken for heroin. Needless to say, I didn't win that one. Not a lawyer, but a defendant. As a teenager, I got busted with a couple of buddies throwing eggs at cars. We were only actually in the courtroom for our sentencing. There was no trial. The judge called each of us up individually to ask us if we had anything to say. One of my friends tells the judge that he is a good kid who doesn't normally do things like this. Lie, we used to do it all the time. And that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wish there was a video of my other friend and I sitting in the benches watching this happen. We simultaneously dropped our heads into our hands because we couldn't believe that idiot just said that. The judge was not pleased, and she took the opportunity to remind him that going to a store, buying eggs, going to another location across town, and then throwing those eggs at cars was not just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a character witness for my childhood dog in a civil trial between our neighbors and my parents. Opposing counsel was questioning me. I wasn't even out of elementary school at the time, and he asked if our dog was aggressive. She was a Rottweiler and very loving and incredibly protective of me and my siblings. His final question to me is one I will never forget. He asked, "Did your father tell you what to say before you came into court today?" I responded, "Yes." Then he asked, "What did he tell you to say?" I said, "The truth." Now I was too young to remember the courtroom reaction, but according to my father, the judge audibly guffawed, and the opposing counsel lost all the wind out of his sails. I was involved in a pretty messy custody case. The other party was a mess and had kept the child from my client for a few weeks. OP was playing lots of stupid games and kept requesting continuances. I requested a drug test, which the judge ordered. However, the OP didn't show up for it. To clarify, he did show up. He just stood in front of the toilet for literally 2 hours and claimed he couldn't pee. I was representing the plaintiff, so the burden was on me. I called multiple witnesses that testified to the defendant's drug use. So, opposing counsel decides to call their client for direct examination and asks, "You don't use heroin and crack, right?" That is, for the non-lawyers, a very stupid question for many reasons, especially considering his client didn't show up for his drug test. However, I fully expected the defendant to just lie and say he was clean. After the question was asked, there was a really long pause and the defendant said, "Yes, I do both of those drugs." My head almost exploded. I didn't ask any questions on cross-examination because I didn't want to muddy the waters. I won, and the child is doing great. I was a baby lawyer in my first year representing the 19-year-old child of some rich people in San Mateo County, CA. My client had gone on a bit of a shoplifting spree, and we were cleaning all her cases up with a global plea, meaning we handled them all at once. Being new, I filled out the plea form wrong, swapping the counts she was charged with for the counts she was pleading to. It's an easy mistake to make. Every court has their own unique form, and I was unfamiliar with San Mateo's. The judge calls my line, starts reading off the plea form, notices the mistake, and then starts screaming at the top of his lungs, "Counsel, what is this? What is this? Is this your first day on the job? This is a court of law, and we do not accept mistakes. Fill this plea form correctly, or I will have you taken into custody for contempt." I did not expect a reaction like that. My client, who had clearly just taken a huge bong rip at 8 a.m. and who was wearing an all-pink velvet tracksuit, was looking at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. I corrected the plea form. The judge made me wait until the very end of the calendar to take my plea. Afterward, he called me up to the bench. In private, he told me, "Sorry to ream you like that. Everyone messes the plea form up, so I always pick the youngest lawyer to yell at. The older guys will grumble and complain, but if you notice, they all fixed their own forms, and we didn't have any more problems. Keeps the calendar running smooth. Where did you go to law school? After that, he invited me into his office for coffee and gave me some really good life work advice. Turns out he likes talking to new lawyers. Medical malpractice defense lawyer here, representing hospitals, doctors. This was not my oh shit moment, but plaintiff's oh shit moment. For context, usually at trial, both plaintiff and defendant will have an expert physician testify as to their opinion to whether the doctor-hospital performed everything correctly. I thoroughly researched plaintiff's expert, who was an OB/GYN, baby delivery, and found out he had been suspended a number of times for his own botched deliveries and giving incorrect medical testimony to help plaintiff's cases. During the actual day of trial, turns out he was not licensed to practice medicine independently, without supervision from another physician, and he was 1 year into his 3-year suspension. Plaintiff's lawyers had no idea about their own expert's background, and they just sat there with a blank look on their face. Needless to say, during cross-examination, we destroyed his credibility and won at trial. Not me, but my former law partner. She was in court representing a client, I think, in a hearing for a restraining order against her soon-to-be ex-husband. Our client was telling the judge that when they met to exchange the children for visitation, the ex had kicked her. He immediately angrily shouted, "She can't prove it, I didn't leave a mark!" Thanks, buddy. I was interning for a judge. We were in the middle of voir dire for what was frankly not that exciting of a criminal case. Half-day trial expected, not salacious details or violence or anything. 75 potential jurors in the room, and when my judge didn't let a guy out of jury duty because he'd have to pick up his kids, that guy proceeded to say in front of everyone that if he was made to show up next week, he'd make it the shortest trial ever, and find him guilty right out of the gate. My judge was an incredibly even-keel guy. Nothing shook him or got a rise out of him, and he was an expert at figuring out what he wanted to say in the most neutral fashion possible before he said it. Conversations with him took forever because there was a pause before every sentence. But then, this guy poisons an entire jury pool of 75 people. We had to individually question each person to see if that little outburst was going to affect their impartiality, etc. 75 in-camera interviews later, judge pulls the guy back in front of everybody and begins to scream at him about disrespecting him, the courts, and every other juror's time. Me, the attorneys, and the court reporter go white-faced because we didn't know this was coming. The guy didn't have to sit for jury duty, but I still don't know if he got to pick his kids up, since he spent a couple days in jail for contempt.